Benjamin Castle are Americans. Watching the footy.
Liam Ryan saying, kick it my way, I want to jump over the pack, and here he comes! Ryan!
This is Buddy Franklin! This is the greatest showman!
Got the handball off to Myers. Myers looking for the lead of Stengel. Gee, they're good. Gee, they're sharp. Razzle dazzle Rioli.
Oh, who else? McDonald!
From inside the centre square. Boys kick the goal. Boys kick the goal. From inside the centre. Foul. I can't believe
that. Good time of day, everyone. Welcome to episode 196 of Americans Watching the Footy. Still not even halfway to Scott Pendlebury. I am Benjamin Castle, coming to you from San Diego.
I'm Ethan Castle, coming to you from Auburn, Massachusetts, just outside of Worcester.
All I'm thinking about now is that we are definitely not Gert.
I am loving all of the Gert posting.
I'm not even sure how many footy fans or players here in America will understand that.
I don't know. I think most of our listener base, at least, will understand the concept to some extent.
I'm continuing to marvel at what Jess Fox is doing, of course, getting her double. And I was also reminded of one of the greatest names in all of sports, as something that sounds like it's straight out of Harry Potter.
And that is?
Zach Stubblety Cook.
Ooh, that is a very Harry Potter name.
Well, it's like Wilhelmina Grubbly Plank.
I was just thinking that. That was like the exact name that came to mind. And there were definitely some other like hyphenated names like that would fit in the slightly silly party.
I mean, this is a clear step up from Kevin Phillips Bong.
Despite Australian resentment of like all things British, basically, which is good. Resenting the British is good. Monty Python is really good. So, I mean, it doesn't seem like it's like not a thing in Australia, but it's nowhere near as big as a lot of other media that we've taken in.
Monty Python and Mr. Bean have both had staying power here in the U.S.
Like on the short list of actual good British things. Although, you know what else I love? The Big Book of British Smiles.
I just love that they lose at so many sports they invented.
Speaking of losing, unless we have another draw, half the teams this week are going to lose.
Oh, don't tempt things, please. I'm scared that we'll get extra time if there's even one more draw.
It's been long enough without a draw.
3 in a season, I do feel like we're at capacity. This round already feels weird before it's starting because we've got a Friday double header.
I mean, sure.
Well, Dogs D's, that is a perfectly cromulent Friday nighter to me. Don't think it'll get, crazy crowds at Marvel, but Bulldogs fans reliably show up, and it's actually not really the Western Bulldogs this round. It's Footscray again in honor of their 1954 VFL Premiership team. They won that grand final against Melbourne.
After thinking about it, I think they should go back to just being Footscray. And I have one reason for that and one reason only. When you say like all the other teams' names, it's location, mascot. It doesn't really work for Western Bulldogs. Like you can't just say, oh, we're playing Western. Like that's not a thing.
The only thing that I can think of like that's reliably called Western is like some directional universities here in the U.S. like Western Michigan and Western Washington.
Yeah, that's totally.
If you know about Western Michigan, it's probably because of their row the boat era. If you know about Western Washington, they probably sent you mail from their admissions department. But yeah, this slightly early Friday night game will start at 7:15 p.m. local. So for Americans, 5:15 a.m. Eastern, 2:15 Pacific. The 8th place Bulldogs in extremely good form, having taken down top 3 opponents each of the past 3 weeks against a somewhat reeling Melbourne side. And I'm not quite saying that because of the loss, but more so because of the additional injury concerns, with chiefly Caleb Windsor being out indefinitely and I'd say likely not playing again this season.
Bulldogs are going to have a bit of a list squeeze again after managing all 3 of Joel Frazier, Jack McRae, and Riley Sanders, and then kicking the crap out of the Swans. I would think Caleb Daniel gets dropped. He was a sub. I think Nick Caulfield is probably the weakest link that you could remove. Also, James O'Donnell is pushing for a return. I don't think there's a spot for him right now, though.
I would put Frazier over him, so I would find that hard. I could find it hard for even Sanders to get back in. If it's not broken, why fix it? I'd say roll with what you got now and see how far it could take you. I'm mostly excited for this game in terms of individuals, though, seeing English versus Gaughan round 2 this year, because Gaughan handily won that matchup in round 1 of the G, part of a 45-point Demons win. Caleb Daniel was subbed in for Riley Sanders in that opener. Well, not Melbourne's opener, but fuck opening round.
It was round 1. I kind of like what it gave us in terms of like additional buys and fewer overlaps. So I'm actually, just off that, I'm a little bit less opposed to it.
I feel like you're in the minority there. This will be game number 250 across 3 clubs for Adam Treloar, who I was surprised to learn has yet to make an All-Australian team. I'd say he's a moderately strong chance this year, maybe not as solid of a front half of the year as some, but post-bye, he's been on another level. It's been him and Ed Richards driving a lot as of late.
You're really liking Treloar to the point where, my criticism of him early in the year a lot of the times was, efficiency stuff, turnovers, some plays where he just wasn't really thinking, where he was just, he was racking up possessions, but it wasn't really doing anything. There's been substance to his game lately. And that, to me, is way more important than the actual disposal numbers, which have been high, and that's cool. But that's not what's really been of importance here.
I wonder if any AFL contract has bonuses written in for getting a certain number of stats, whether it's an average or just a raw number. Like thinking about how the Seahawks ran that one last play to get, was it Tyler Lockett, a big contract bonus a few years ago?
It's funny because normally you see teams like going out of their way to avoid giving guys bonuses. There are some really interesting ones in baseball that are fun to discuss, like stuff about if guys get MVP votes, things like that. And it was discussed on one of my favorite shows, Baseball Barbacast, that Miguel Cabrera last year had a vesting option for this year if he got any MVP votes. So it's like, shouldn't a division rival like pay off a reporter to put him on their MVP ballot so that the Tigers had to pay him for another year?
So it was David Moore. This was at the end of the 2020-2021 regular season. Did this one extra play, this just two-hand underhand pass to him to get him enough catches to make his bonus.
I am generally all for like performance-based escalators in contracts. Kind of a win-win. If you're the team, you don't mind paying them for getting shit done. If you're the player, I mean, you already have incentive to perform, but an extra motivational factor is never a bad thing. I think more teams should be doing stuff like that. And I don't know what's, within the CBA, what's allowed within the AFL, but it would be cool. So if any team is listening to this, consider that. Like, my other favorite was this past year, Brian Ferentz trying to get Iowa to score 25 points a game, and they weren't even close.
Well, that was pretty much his job on the line. That's a difference there. The Bulldogs will enter as 22.5 point favorites. I'm not opposed to that, considering the shakeup on the wing for Melbourne and just the greater efficiency of the midfield compared to the Demons as well. We've been harping on Jack Viney and a bit of Clayton Oliver. They were better this past week, but they've advanced the ball a decent amount, but at low efficiency. And I think the Dogs could really make them pay for that.
I could see a world where Melbourne wins this game just off of the fact that they need it more. But realistically, they're in pretty deep shit regardless.
The Coast Clash is the polar bear in Arlington, Texas of Friday fixtures this year.
I mean, it's good that it's not a standalone game and that it's staggered instead of having a 5-game Saturday. I do kind of want this to be a Dwayne Russell game so we can get all the thes. Last week was bye round. This week can be the round.
Dwayne Russell and Jared Healy. I'm just more opposed to the scheduling of this round because of how royally they fucked Saturday night.
That's upsetting to me too. This is not. I am not bothered by the Coast Clash being when it is.
Just the fact that you've got 2 standalone games on Saturday and the other 2 games are far more attractive, the ones that actually directly overlap, but more on that in a bit. So the Eagles and Suns will get underway out west at 6:30 p.m. local, 8:30 p.m. Eastern time. So for Americans, 6:30 a.m. Eastern, 3:30 Pacific on Fox Soccer Plus. 6 wins and 3 places separate these teams, and the Eagles will look to snap a 4-game head-to-head streak.
Had the Suns won Q Clash, this would have been a far more compelling game. They did not. I am interested in, it could happen sometime during this show where lists come out, and then at the very end, we could just kind of run through them really quickly, do like a little live reaction or something. But where does Damian Hardwick go this week, I think, is the most intriguing question.
Well, I know he won't go to Brandon Ellis because he retired on Wednesday, effective immediately. 2-time Premiership player, 251 games across his 13-year career. He will be keeping Bodie Uland in all likelihood because, well, he was the Suns' best this past round, and also the charge that he was given of dangerously tackling Lachie Neal was a joke. Michael Christian out.
It was such a dangerous tackle that I have no recollection of it happening.
It was with a couple minutes left in the first half.
Normally, when I'm watching a game and something that's possibly going to be suspension worthy happens, I see it right away and I note it. Let me check if I even noted it when it happened. And I do need to go back and rewatch that game. We both have a few games to catch up on for award purposes. That'll happen over the coming days. There was a different tackle in that game that I think I had seen that was like, that could be something, but that one wasn't. Like, I seriously did not remember when this happened at all.
It was kind of a little wrestling match off the ball, and there was really nothing in it. Hardwick is definitely able to change some things. If you think about who he dropped this past week, Jed Walter and Alex Sexton were dropped out. Ned Boyle was subbed out. It didn't really work to have him playing alongside Jared Witz, so
I mean, I'd just lean into the young guys at this point.
So what do you keep Sexton out?
I don't know. Looking at this past week, let's see, who was especially bad? Well, I think Ned Moyle gets dropped. Thomas Berry was the sub, so hard to evaluate him. I think Nick Holman is definitely making the case to get dropped, which is unfortunate because when he's going well, I really like him. The toughest one to deal with is like a David Swallow situation. Like, you've got a guy who's meant so much to this club, but just isn't performing, and you got to figure out how to handle that.
He's been the substitute a lot this year. Maybe we're in line for that again. Like, not on a Luke Bruce level or Tajwell Woden level, but he's been the sub relatively frequently. And if you're trying to maximize time in the youngsters, maybe leaving that older player out until the end is the way to do it more gently for him.
You could also probably just say he's being managed for a game like this, long trip, slightly short week.
Yeah, all sorts of ways you can say that.
The one thing that really intrigues me about this game now that I have started to think about it, because this is not a game I've given much thought to, is Ben King. The last couple of weeks, it's been really rough to watch. We've seen this with other tall forwards at times, including his brother, where they just get into this stretch where they just can't hit anything. He takes a hanger this past week. He finally hits one, and it led to,
Nothing! Now get out!
Well, if Jeremy McGovern's back in, Ben's job will definitely be tougher, and it looks like McGovern, along with Liam Duggan, should be ready to go. I'm still surprised that McGovern is even considered available 4 weeks after breaking a rib and puncturing a lung. Is this like a Black Knight situation?
Running away, you yellow bastard!
I think that's actually pretty accurate.
He's been like this for so much of his career, though, and he's toward the end of it now is the amazing thing. They still acting like this. I hope this doesn't force out Harry Edwards that he's kept in over Josh Rotham, because Harry is much more of the actual future there in defense. The other big thing for the Eagles selection-wise is the debut of Clay Hall, pick number 38 from this past year. Strong runner through the middle, something that's needed. I'm hoping they get some games in there in the last few rounds for Locke Rawlinson and Archer Reed as well, but Hall's a start.
And there's going to be openings this week because Luke Edwards is concussed again. You mentioned Tom Barras, and then you've got suspensions for both Jack Hutchinson and Jack Petrocelli. So I guess this game was going to be a Jack off with Lukosius on the other side, but instead the Jacks are off. The game against the Saints could have really been a jack-off.
Yeah, there was no darling for that one, though. There still is going to be a jack, though, for the Eagles. Don't forget Jack Williams, who was one of the few Eagles who had a more consistent four-quarter output in the Derby.
I think I really missed an opportunity not calling the game a couple of weeks ago the jack-off then.
You talk about this every year and you forget when it happens.
Well, because I don't think of the Eagles as the jack team. I think of the Saints as the jack team.
I'm just hoping that they don't do the easy thing and just give games to the veterans. Again, you've got Campbell Chesser and Tyrell Dewar to bring back in if you're not going to be debuting anybody else. I'm probably going to be disappointed when I see the lists in around the end of this episode. The Suns are 14.5-point favorites, and now that their splits have been broken, it's time for them to get one on the road.
It always seems like, once one goes the other. It's just like how when North needed to win a game, all they had to do was finally have a goalless quarter. I can totally see the Eagles winning this game, though. I just think the last couple weeks, the Suns have looked especially bad.
I'm not ruling any outcome, any margin out for any reason. I'm going to go into this game probably quite tired, but wide-eyed metaphorically as I can be.
If we're talking range of outcomes, I think the least likely outcome would be like a blowout Eagles win. I could definitely see the Eagles winning, but I can't see it being by more than 20 to 30. And some of that's talent limits, some of that's style. Again, though, definitely a game that could win.
I feel like you could introduce the first game on Saturday afternoon like John Rothstein does on Twitter.
Yes, North Melbourne, Richmond, standalone game. But before we do that, since this is news that's especially relevant to both these clubs, just got a notification that the grand final will stay at its traditional 2:30 start time. I know you've been working on the trombone version of Join in the Chorus.
Well, why did I say North Melbourne will be premieres in 2093? I'll be ready.
Yeah, again, with scheduling stuff, it's like, is there something else they're scheduling around? It can't be an Olympic thing just off of time of day.
8:45 p.m. Pacific time in the U.S., 11:45 Eastern. That would be, I believe, 5:45 a.m. Central European time.
Yeah, so this really doesn't make sense.
It makes even less sense then that Cole Carr and Port Sydney are right up against each other, as you would see some Olympics coverage probably starting.
I don't get this at all.
And I get that 7 doesn't carry the Olympics, but it just feels off.
You want to schedule things so that people watch them, right?
I mean, people will watch this because there's no other choice. This spoon off between 17th and 18th, both at 2 and 17. They met last year in round 23. That was Trent Cotchin and Jack Zeebel's finales. Neither could kick accurately. Cotchin went out cursing, and Zeebel went out getting punched that night.
Still one of the weirder things that happened this past year.
I don't know how many people even remember, just because it was not a relevant team. Well, actually, it was relevant, just it was after he had retired, and everything else North-related kind of got flipped on its head a week later. That was one of Dusty's best games last year, the round 23 game against North, and he could be back.
I'm actually kind of looking forward to this. First off, as much as I don't love that it's a standalone game, it's a time of night when baseball's still going on and stuff, and I'm just starting to settle into footy for the night. So it'll be nice to be able to watch this and maybe be a little less locked in, and then ideally it ends up a really good game, and then you end up really locked in. And I liked how North played for most of last week, as I've said. It's just they had, and this has been the thing the last couple of weeks, they have that one really bad mistake that leads to a breakdown, and then they can never really recover from that.
The Toby Nankervis versus Tristan Cherry-Ruck duel should be one of the better parts of this game. Should be a pretty physical game as a whole. From the middle, we'll see if Jack Graham and Tim Torino are ready to go. If they are, Graham to Sheasel.
Yeah, Jack Graham really was establishing himself well as a tagger in the couple of games before he got hurt. For a guy who's 26, looks way older, maybe because he's a double premiership player, I just always imagined him being 30. But for a guy at this stage of his career to be establishing himself in that role is pretty cool. Usually it's younger guys that are in that position.
Unfortunately, the read on tagging Sheasel is easier because George Wardlaw experienced delayed concussion symptoms. That's his second in a year, and so I wouldn't be shocked if he's held out for longer than this week.
Also, Charlie Coben might not be able to go this week. He had some groin soreness, missed part of last week's game with that, ended up playing it out, but you could tell he was less than 100%. North should be getting Colby McKercher back from what they describe as soreness.
Ah, yes, very specific.
It's like, what part of his body is injured? The soreness part. He injured his soreness.
The returns of Zach Fisher and Eddie Ford would definitely help just in terms of depth in both 50s. Fisher might end up needing to have a bit more prominent of a intercepting role if indeed Coleman and Aiden Core can't go. This would also be probably the most offensively involved game up to this point for Griffin Logue.
Ford had finally strung together a couple of good games because, it had been so sporadic for him. Like, you would see flashes and then you wouldn't see it for a couple of weeks. It would be like once a month. He had gotten into some consistency and then was hurt. So I really hope he can get up to speed quickly again. I think he's not just a fun player, but a fun personality. He's got a little bit of an edge to him on a team that's mostly just a bunch of nice guys. You got to have a couple that can get under people's skin, and he certainly can.
Yeah, well, there's really him and maybe Will Phillips, but definitely, as Dwayne Russell called him a couple years ago in this matchup, the King of Marvel.
Zurhar?
Yeah, who is extended now for 5 more years through 2029. He was one of 2 extensions that North dealt with this week, the other being Jackson Archer.
I know you've really liked some of Archer's play lately. He had a couple games early in the year that I really liked. It was what, couple weeks ago, who did they play? It was the Carleton game. I think you really liked Archer, right?
Definitely building something up. This will be Luke McDonald's 200th game as well, a father-son pick, of course, and a co-captain. But just thinking back to Zurhar, I automatically think about that 6-goal game he had in North's round 18 win in 2022. I think about that far more than Jack Revolt's inaccuracy or Jake Art's idiotically playing on and sacrificing his career so that North could win a game.
When I think about that game, I remember Sonia Hood celebrating with Ben Cunnington. It was that whole run of Richmond losing close games in very derpy fashion and drawing one as well.
The draw was the next week.
Oh, wow. But it was just I think there was more happiness for North than just the laughing at Richmond.
Well, North are 3.5-point favorites, and
When's the last time they were favored? Maybe round 1 last year when they played the Eagles?
Yeah, that was the what does Bailey J even do game.
No, the Eagles were favored for that one by 1.5 points.
Now I have no clue whatsoever.
This might be their first time favored since 2022. Middle game Saturday, I'm glad this is a standalone game, not that it should be with what other games demand that sort of prestige and platform, but I'm happy because this is the one I'm going to be locked in on anyway, as the Cats host Adelaide at GMHBA Stadium, 11:35 on the West Coast, 2:35 a.m. on the East Coast, 4:05 p.m. in South Australia, and 4:35 at Geelong. This is a Fox Sports 2 game. Cats in 6th, Crows in 15th, coming off a really bad second half against the Hawks. Cats have won 6 of the last 7 and 13 straight at home against the Crows. The one loss was the game that made me realize, damn, I really care about this team because I'm fucking pissed right now. That being the 2021 opener. Cats won back in round 2 by 19. Isaac Rankin kicked an awesome late goal that was described as a huge goal, even though it was with 10 seconds left to cut the deficit to 19.
Some Chris Paul vibes.
It was the Cats' first real road win since 2022. Tom Stewart was awesome in his 150th game, destroyed Luke Pedler. Ryan was really good. Adelaide had a bunch of forwards missing easy shots. I remember one on the run going into the post by, was it Ben Keys?
I mean, Ben Keys has a special relationship with the goalposts.
Oh, it was Darcy Fogarty, actually.
Yeah, it makes it even stranger.
Also, that was the game with the pitch invader getting tackled and Jeremy Cameron signaling holding the ball.
I knew I had some weird memory in this game.
Tom Atkins is back, which is especially important. He's missed last couple of weeks with a back injury. Good like-for-like matchup for, say, Rory Laird. fitting him and Zach Tui both into the lineup may be a bit of a struggle. Tui was managed and Jed Buse got in and made a great case to stay in. There will be an opening with Gary Rowan out concussed, but I don't know where else you move. Maybe you manage Mitch Duncan. I assume someone like Duncan would be more likely to get managed for the trip to Frio. I'd rather do it this week. But yeah, Buse still belongs in the team. That's the main thing. And then, I'd love for Ted Closey to get a full game. But the changes could just be as simple as Atkins and Tui for Closey and Rowan. Also, no news is good news in terms of hearing anything about Tyson Stengel in the last couple days. Seems like he's been back at training in full capacity. He went out on Saturday night and ended up in the hospital. Some speculation like someone put something in his drink. What I like about this is it's not getting all blown out of proportion and it's being handled internally, whatever it is. And that's the biggest difference between successful clubs and unsuccessful clubs. And this is true in any sport. They handle their shit internally. I think back to the 2020 Mets basically just putting out a release saying, Yoenis Cespedes is missing. That's the exact opposite of how you handle things. Yeah, for a couple hours, people thought he was missing. And it was he just packed up and went home.
Like Ken Griffey had done a few years prior. The Crows are chances to bring back a couple key pieces. I'd say a few, actually, with Jordan Dawson, Nick Murray, and Josh Worrell all more than on the mend. Worrell put up some really solid numbers at the Sandful and just could have been used. I think people can forget how important his run and carry can be post-intercept.
And the interceptability itself is quite good. I still maintain he should have been the one with the showdown medal, not Saligo. Oh, geez. The combination of Thilthorpe and Walker could be a challenge for DeConing and Henry. But I think you can also probably just drop Tom Stewart back more this week, considering what he's done to the Crows historically.
That would also make it easier to fit Atkins back into the midfield mix, so I would be in full approval of that. Meanwhile, I know the Crows will do the exact opposite of what they should and probably snub Dan Curtin altogether.
You got to get the old guys in. You're not going to make finals without them. You're also not going to make finals with them.
Our frustration with the Crows is a reverse of how we've been frustrated for a while with Bulldogs selection.
Whereas with the Bulldogs, there's no pattern. The Crows, there's too much of a pattern.
Geelong are 19.5-point favorites, but I could see this game being closer because of some of those forward challenges. I think Geelong will be the more effective team in the ruck in terms of actually getting things to advantage.
I'm actually kind of confident this should be a bit of a bigger line. Maybe that's stupid because Geelong has been oddly bad at home lately. They've lost 3 of 5 at home, and one of the 2 wins was a not very impressive performance against a very shorthanded Richmond side. But I don't know. I feel good about this one. I feel that the Crows, just with how dysfunctional they've been, I think they're ripe for the picking. That said, they've played very well in Victoria. I could also see the Crows being totally unprepared for how to handle the horrors of a field with different dimensions. That just seems like something that would happen to them. My other thing, I've been disappointed with how quiet home crowds have been at Geelong this year, other than round 1. I think that was propelled by a really loud Saints contingent and wanting to match that. So if you're going to the game this weekend, I want to hear you from home.
Now, normally we split episodes after the 4th game, but in protest of the worst Saturday night overlap we have seen in 5 years of watching the AFL, we're going to split the Saturday night games for this week on either side of the break. Did you know, Ethan, that you and I have played as many home and away games at Cardinia Park as Scott Pendlebury?
I appreciated, I'm still catching up on podcasts from months ago, but Mason Cox joking about having to make the long trip to Marvel. There's a level of self-awareness about this, I think, at Collingwood. But yeah, this game has been sold out for over a month. Pendlebury 400, Collingwood Carlton, or as I like to call it in the spirit of the great Brazilian soccer rivalry, Kolkar. This game could shatter attendance records. Last time they met was more than 88,000, and Nick Dacos kicked the game winner with 1:03 left.
Oh, he just took over that 4th quarter altogether, and that was the game where he was finally put into the middle more, and they haven't looked back. There was no Jordan DeGoey or Tom Mitchell, so more responsibility fell to him, and because he's Nick Dacos, he ran with it, particularly in the final term. I think he and Pendlebury were really propelling things there. And I was really positive about what Pendlebury did this past week, too, in the 3 quarters he had. Started off the game well, read things well. He's always in good shape. It's honestly incredible just to get to 400, obviously, and being the fastest to do it from your debut.
400 is a big deal, and I believe the most recent one before this was Sean Burgoyne, and I don't think we fully appreciated it at the time. Like, we knew the number, how rare it is, that he was only the 5th ever, but, in the last couple of years, we've still gotten, more appreciation for that, and what goes into sticking around that long.
I have said I would want to see how Pendlebury trains over pretty much any other athlete just because of the diverse set of skills required to succeed in Australian rules.
And like I've said, the older you get, the more you got to do to get your body into game shape, no matter what sport you're playing.
And amazingly, he's ready to do every week.
Attendance-wise, the actual number is going to entirely rely on MCC members, yeah?
I think it'll hit the 90s. I don't want to bet anything else.
I think a lot of MCC members will stay away from this game because they think of the Collingwood and Carlton fans as hooligans and don't want to be around the bourgeoisie. I know that if I had the opportunity to be at this game, I would be there. This has a chance to be a pivotal, defining moment in this rivalry. As the last meeting was, it's going to go down as an iconic Collingwood-Carlton moment, the Dacos winner. Now, this is basically a must-win for Collingwood, considering they are on 40 points. I guess there's a slim scenario in which a 12-9-2 record would be enough, but their remaining schedule is the sort of schedule you would expect to have after winning a flag. Remember, they go at Sydney, home against Brisbane, and then the D's. So that margin for error is already so slim to begin with.
I think at this point, the Pies might actually need to win out unless they get some huge percentage boost. There's only one team above them with a worse percentage than them, and that's Essendon. And I give Collingwood a better shot at making finals than Essendon in the first place.
I think there are also enough teams to trip over themselves still, that there is totally a world where it ends up being 50 points to get in instead of 52, but I don't know about 48.
So the Pies are still a chance.
Yeah, actually. Considering what the last couple years have been I will not count them out until they are absolutely gone. They will be probably running out some fresh legs this week because they have a bunch of guys that missed last week's game. Nathan Kruger should be out of concussion protocols. I don't know if they throw him back in or not. Oleg Markov, congrats on the birth of your son. I still don't think his performance in his most recent game, I'm referring to Oleg, not his son. His son hasn't had a game yet. But I would back in Billy Frampton over him. And by far the most important, Beau McCreary should be back from his calf injury. And that's just so huge for forward pressure and 1%ers and doing the little grimy stuff to get goals.
We know Carlton will be without David Cunningham. He did his shoulder. He's out for the season. He's unfortunately quite fragile. And you're probably still thinking about his opening round performance against the Lions.
It's really the only game of his I think about is the thing. I don't really have too many other distinct memories of him doing especially impactful stuff.
I wouldn't be shocked if this were it for him in navy blue. Some defensive changes are necessary. Bring Jordan Boyd in to play on Bobby Hill. It's not rocket science.
Bobby Hill's been pretty quiet for a while now, so wonder if Collingwood really they take a step to challenge him in particular.
Or maybe size him up to Schultz?
You know my belief with Carlton's defense. Brody Kemp is not playing AFL level defense right now.
He was for a bit around May or June, but not at the moment. And so, yeah, Boyd seems like an obvious, and I'm surprised he wasn't in the first place. Potential for Blake Acres and Harry Mackay to come back in. We'll see about Caleb Marchbank. I mean, he'll probably get something to come up because it's Marchbank, unfortunately. By the way, just checking on some attendance things. I believe the Anzac game last year was 95,179 or something like that. Yeah, that was the exact total. That's the second biggest home and away crowd ever. The odds mean absolutely nothing in this game. You know this because of the rivalry. You know this because of the milestone. Carlton minus 12.5. Don't even try.
I'd probably put it at 9.5. I don't know. It's a tough one to tip, though.
If it's after the siren, it's not Pendlebury.
No, it's Elliott or Dacos, right?
It's Jamie Elliott, just like Essa did a couple years back. Thinking about that makes me sad that Josh Carmichael had to medically retire because he came on as the sub in that game and had a couple goals there.
You know, Benjamin, 78% of our listeners are between 18 and 35 years old, so they probably want to start a podcast like we did.
How did you know that number, Ethan?
Thanks to the analytics we have for Spotify for Podcasters.
Formerly known as Anchor, sorry Frio fans, Spotify for Podcasters has tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast from your phone or your computer. No fancy software needed.
It's so easy you can edit it while drunk.
And Spotify for Podcasters doesn't just allow you to upload to Spotify, you can also distribute your podcast on platforms like Apple, Stitcher, and more, just like we do.
Best of all, it's completely free.
Not only is it free, you can even make money from listener support or ad revenue. Hint, hint.
Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to podcasters.spotify.com to get started today.
I'm very tired, and I'm kind of tired of repeating this, but follow us. Xavier Dersma did. Adam Papalia did. What's your excuse? Twitter is @AmericansFooty. Instagram is also @AmericansFooty. We're on YouTube. Individually, I'm at Castle Media. He's at Benjamin HK01. My son, the executive producer, is on Instagram at Cat Named Brian.
I like to think of myself as a good cat uncle.
What about as a man of faith?
Shouldn't you ask Lance Collard?
Yes. Oh, speaking of, Tom Brenneman's going to be doing college football on the CW.
He got rehired.
Yes.
Well, thankfully for him, it's very, very rare for a football game to have, at any time, a score of 4-0. I have no idea how much that meme resonates in Australia.
I mean, look, thanks Basil at least had some level of U.S. relevance, so I gotta imagine people are pretty aware of it. So we put the two games that are going to be running at the same time on opposite ends of the break. I know Benjamin kind of was doing this out of protest to the absolute ridiculous fact that these two banger games are going up against each other. Like, this was terrible scheduling when it was done a couple months ago. It's not like recent events have changed this. So this is really fucking stupid. But we're going to try to just split them up, kind of like King Solomon when he was going to cut that baby.
Right, he didn't actually cut it.
Should have done it.
Well, the one thing that does go against Port and Sydney is that it's been a very one-sided matchup. Port have won the last 7 meetings, and they don't double up, so the Swans haven't beaten Port since 2016. This is actually going to be the FS1 game during this window. Kolkar is on FS2, and that also feels backwards, but
I
that's
do
what we got.
appreciate that we're getting both FS2 and FS1 at the same time.
First time this year, maybe.
And, considering like when the Olympics are on and stuff, I think it'll help, get at least a few people that are up early, flipping through channels, looking for something, will come across it, and then eventually migrate over to Olympic World, which is on the NBC family of networks.
You said that very professionally. So Port and Sydney haven't played since round 4 of last year at the SCG, and Ethan called it.
I can't believe how well I nailed that. That was up there with like Joel McHale calling how long Kim Kardashian and Chris Humphries are going to be married for. And he said 75 days and it was 72.
You said right at the end of that round's preview.
You know what we're due for? Is someone missing a potential game-winning kick after the siren. Like, not just, got a bomb it from 60, but like an actual reasonable set shot.
And then Ollie Florid's kick fell short, and former Swan Alir, who will be playing his 150th this week against his old side, spoiled it. That was an excellent game for Alir even before the final play, and it felt gratifying because the umpiring was definitely in Sydney's favor in that game.
The whole sequence of emotions in those final seconds was amazing, but it was also just a really compelling game the entire way through. To be fair, what I had really called was more along the lines of like what we had with Logan McDonald a few weeks ago, except, maybe it would be just you're down by 2 to 5 points and you kick up behind. Despite everything, I am glad that this is a night game because Never Tear Us Apart feels way more badass at night. What also matters is that the Swans are getting James Rowbottom back. That's huge.
we saw the impact of him and Justin McInerney both being out, you'll get halfway to having all your list completers back in there.
We still don't have a timetable on McInerney. We do know that Tom Papley's going to be like 3 to 5 weeks. Swans have a few questions. I'm surprised that Lewis Melkin is even in consideration to play after the hamstring injury last week, but all three of him, Will Hayward, and Dane Rampy are questionable. Could be an in for Aaron Francis. I was very surprised on the In the Mix article. Martin Smith suggested that Rowbottom coming back could make it tough for Corey Warner to hold his spot. I think Corey Warner's been one of the only bright spots in these last few weeks.
Yeah, kind of a center half forward link player. I think he's essential right now, especially with McInerney out. He could fill some of the forward half job that McInerney and others are able to do. And, I take guys like Wicks out, for example, ahead of Corey Warner with these. There's a potential for Todd Marshall to be back for Port, but otherwise, nothing else big to report. Remember, Marshall got hurt when Charlie Dixon fell over him a couple weeks ago.
Could get Jed McEntee back. He's been used as the annoyance guy. And I think that's something you do against Nick Blakey. Or you could try to, what I'd really try to do is just replicate what the Bulldogs did last week and just make him chase guys all the time. Like Riley West in particular kept getting loose and Blakey was trying to run back to chase and couldn't get there. And then West would end up marking.
I love that job that West did. Kind of less defensive forward work, which he can do, and more just out-thinking and out-running forward. And you could see guys like Frank Evans and Jackson Meade factoring into that.
Now, the caveat there is if you turn it over, then you don't have anyone on Blakey, and he's able to lead a run the other way.
I think someone like Meade could help provide the pressure, though. We've seen his running capacity. I also would like for Sydney to try and bring players onto Dan Houston and Logan Evans and Kane Farrell, just any two of the three of them at any time, Houston and one of the others. That's something that maybe Corey Warner and Sam Wicks could do.
I have a very non-controversial opinion. If Brody Grundy ends Jordan Sweet's insanity run, the Swans win. It is not a coincidence that Brody Grundy's best games and Sydney's best games have been the same.
Well, let's see how he does back home.
Sunday, I think for all the complaining about the way Saturday was orchestrated, I think this is a really good set of Sunday games. Now, some of that has to do with a couple of teams' recent form, one good, one not good. But I think this is probably the deepest set of Sunday games we've had in a while, yeah?
We've gotten West Coast and North out of the way, and they've been Sunday fodder for a lot of the year, so it's...
And Richmond.
Without the bottom three in there, yeah, by default, it's going to be better. And even, for example, the Saints, who are playing the round finale, they've been in better form lately.
You've got a Saints team in better form and an Essendon team that is compelling because they're in bad form. But the first game on Sunday, I think, has to be the best of the trio, at least on paper, with GWS hosting Hawthorn in Canberra.
Last time these teams met in Canberra, it was also round 21. It was 5 years ago, and it snowed.
I hope the Giants come out motivated after the way the prior meeting ended down in Tasmania. The pretty iffy late free kick called against Tom Green, setting up the game-winning goal for Hawthorn. That was also the game where Connor Nash woke up. In our notes, it asks if it's his best game of the year. I would say no, it probably wasn't, but it definitely was at the time, and it's really spurred that run of games from him.
I remember Nash. I remember O'Halloran in that game too, I think.
Yes.
Those were really your two options for best all ground, I think. That was just an excellent back-and-forth game. O'Halloran kicked 4 goals straight. No Canelio or Kelly, so he had some real responsibility here out of the middle.
Still no Canelio this week. He seemed like a likelier candidate to come back last week. This shoulder thing seems to be going on a little longer. But if Tom Green keeps up his recent form where he's had a little bit more purpose to the way he's shifted play downfield from the middle, I think they'll be all right.
Oh, you know what? I just remembered something else about that first meeting. That was when Ned Reeves got hurt. So it started Meek Mondays, I guess, indirectly, but also within the rest of that game, it was more about the first disposal post clearance. Josh Weddle did a good job pinch hitting in the ruck and helping set up those next touches. That's like advanced footy viewing. I really appreciate it.
That game had a lot of sliding doors moments in hindsight.
It's not the first game you would show people.
No, it's the sort of game that you show people with like an understanding of players and teams, because there was like significance there that like without the subtext, it's just a decent game.
Glad we mentioned Connor Nash also because he just signed on for 5 more years.
He's going to be a part of this core for a long time. I knew he would get a boost from playing alongside Will Day, but the size of the boost has certainly been pretty staggering.
I could see Finn McGinnis getting dropped for Hawthorne because he was the sub each of the past 2 weeks, and he got guys like Frenchie McKenzie to give another shot.
I mean, well, he was managed at first, right? And then kind of put in the VFL?
Yeah, that's right.
I don't think McKenzie should have ever been back in the twos. That one surprised me. I think it might have been one of those, like, it's no fault of your own. It's just everyone else is on a tear right now. So we're just, it's like someone's got to drop.
Tough to drop guys like Josh Ward.
No, Ward's done a really good job as a role player the last few weeks.
Just looking at last week's list, there's just hardly anybody else that you could reasonably say, oh yeah, take him out.
I mean, no fault of McGinnis, but just like, I'd rather have McKenzie in. Despite the fact that he's definitely not the player he once was, this could be a game for Jack Gunston just to try to occupy one of Taylor or Buckley.
Well, he did that last time.
I thought Buckley this past week was fantastic. He had better numbers in the win over the Suns, but I loved his game this past week.
You see, it's this sort of talk that makes me think that McKenzie might have to wait another week. I would think, Gunston for McGinnis, and then, the only other option would be like resting somebody up, I don't think you rest Sicily as you're making a push for finals, but he wasn't then. But
maybe you go Gunston for Deer.
Yeah, that's the only other one there.
And I like Deer, so it's just a matter of, I think, playing this matchup. I think having Gunston take a guy one-on-one could make more sense than Deer's sort of just impact on marking contests.
And I love that about him and Nick Watson, that they both go up and do that, and that they don't get in each other's way while at it. That connection will only become stronger with time. The Middle Sunday game, we love this matchup.
It was literally the first game we ever watched. I'm surprised this one's at the G instead of Marvel. And it was at Marvel that very first time. I remember at that point, in the time of sanitizing the goalposts and spraying them down, they were playing with the roof open at Marvel, which I still don't understand why that's not a thing on days with good conditions, why that's totally gone by the wayside.
On days where there are good enough conditions, the designated home team should have a say in that.
But yes, Essendon and Fremantle, no, there will be no, but still a special matchup. I guess it means the Dockers will be on a national game for the second time in 3 weeks. I like to see that.
Flag mantle force scene. This is a matchup that has gone heavily in favor of the home team. The home team has won 11 of 13 since 2014. And yeah, that first game we watched, it was a 6-point Essendon win. I think Walla was the first player that we actually came to recognize.
Yes, he was the first and Ben Brown was the second.
Right, the next night. These are just teams going in very different directions right now. Only 2 games separating them, but it feels like they're worlds apart, hearts broken in 2.
Two. Great song. Great reference. Easily their best song.
Cheesy in a good way, especially the video. I hear that song in my head super fast because of how marching bands, including Calf, play it. I think last year's blueprint could be replicated by Freo, just winning in the forward 2/3, especially from the center. If you can manage that again and limit how much Merritt and Caldwell and Dern can do, win from the center, immediately take things a bit outward or use your speed, and that's the way to beat them. It's what the Saints did this past week. It was a low stoppage game, and while Freo could stand up to Essendon at a greater frequency of stoppage, I just don't think you give him the chance.
So you're saying Jeremy Sharp is going to be a big factor in this game?
I'm saying Jeremy Sharp. I'm saying Jordan Clark.
And I've said this before, he's both shaping the attacks and then following along and staying involved in them throughout the ground instead of just kind of like watching it from the back. I mean, he's got a really high motor.
No, he makes stuff happen. Also, you have James H. to employ there. He's been the sub in back-to-back weeks, so another option.
I think he might stay in that role. This might be one of those, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Although they could go in a different direction there. They will have a change of some sort this week because Nat Fife has a 1-game suspension.
Yeah, that was for striking Jai Cully, so is this finally an opportunity to get Neil Erasmus playing in the middle?
I think Matt Johnson supersedes him on the hierarchy if he's able to go. I get the feeling, considering his comments from this past week, I think Brad Scott's going to be the axe swinger this week. I think he's going to have some major changes.
Well, we know Jordan Ridley's out with a hip flexor injury. Otherwise, it truly is up to him.
No shortage of strong performers down in the twos to choose from. I find it amazing that Nick Hine was ever dropped. I'd get him back in.
Well, there's Not Dead Ben, there's Archie Roberts fighting for a debut. We haven't seen Albert Davey Jr. in a while.
Elijah Soreness has so much upside and has yet to get consistent opportunities. He's in a tough spot because last year injuries slowed him down, and this year the team got off to a good enough start that there wasn't really a spot for him to come in and get consistent time. Maybe here's that opportunity. Because he needs a chance to finally get in there and play on a consistent basis, or else he's going to be doing that for another club. Because he's definitely a high-quality player.
You know, Josh Tracy just signed on for 4 more years through 2030. He's going to be turning 22 on game day. He and Jai Amos are set to be there for a while, I think.
Would you have expected Tracy to, surpass Jai Amos on the hierarchy?
Absolutely not. But am I here for it? Absolutely so.
Well, that's not a knock on Amos, even though Amos has had some set shot and accuracy issues. Even if he was in really good form, what Tracy's done, not just in the forward 50, but up and down the field, has been so impressive. What do Essendon do against him?
Pray.
Any scenario where Essendon wins that doesn't involve Freo just self-destructing, it's going to come down to Sam Durham getting in there and making life tough on Caleb Sarong and company.
Durham enabling Caldwell and Merritt. I think it may be, a lower touch game for Durham, but if he can neutralize Sarong, then that'll be what matters. And then also more consistency on the wing. Whoever's going to be opposite Dursma, whether that's Harry Jones or Nick Cox, and I would back in Harry Jones. Looking back at the stats from last week, Jake Stringer was the co-leader in clearances in that game for Essendon and St Kilda with 8. I'm not sure if that's real feasible, though, because you like Stringer as a runner still. I mean, this team's got plenty of runners. It's a matter of which one do you actually put in the guts and sacrifice a little bit of that speed. And I think Durham would be the easiest one to sacrifice there.
I think he's also just so valuable in the contest and in clearances that I don't even look at him as a runner first. I look at him as clearance guy first.
I mean, I could still think of him as a runner because he was very much a wing before this season.
Freo favored by 8.5. That seems a little low. I'd probably put it out at about, 14.5?
I'll go with 12.5. Oh, forgot to mention, Freo actually had a Josh fight, a Josh contract extension fight, because Josh Draper, the Rising Star nominee from last round, also signed on for a couple more years. Oh, and they'll be celebrating Caleb Sarong's 100th.
This game being at the G is weird. I'm not complaining about it, but it's weird. I mean, it's not like the other game that finishes off this round would have been there.
This is the first time that these teams will have played each other at the G in 25 years.
Wow.
1999, round 14, the last time.
St. Kilda hosts Brisbane at Marvel to finish the round, so I guess some of the scheduling, would have been reliant on pacing out where and when the Marvel games are. So I guess that kind of handicapped some of the scheduling for this round. 3 Marvel games and 2 at the MCG. Still think they could have scheduled things a bit better in regards to that overlap, but I do get now that certain games would have had to be spread across certain days. So I think they made the right choice for which of the Marvel games was going to be Friday. But the Saints and Lions, 11:40 p.m. our time, still Saturday, 2:40 a.m. Sunday on the East Coast, and 4:40 p.m. locally. It's a Fox Soccer Plus game. Saints in 14th, but up to 8 and 11, have embraced the identity of just team that you don't want to play right now. And the Lions are up to 2nd.
This is the 3rd straight year these teams are doubling up. The Lions have won all 5 of those meetings, but round 14 was a very different sort of Saints game where they actually started to open things up, and they kicked 7 goals in the 4th. A light bulb must have gone off in Ross Lyon's head and remember, wait a minute, these guys can run.
If it hadn't been preceded by such a poor defensive game, now that also might have been what initiated it in the first place. It's a game they easily could have won, and despite the head-to-head history being one-sided, this matchup has created some really entertaining games. As someone who doesn't usually get excited about Saints footy, Saints Lions usually is a compelling watch.
I do think this will probably fall outside the line. I expect the Lions to win by 3 goals plus still.
10.5 does seem a little low, but I can totally see a scenario in which St. Kilda actually wins this game.
I'm not saying it. I'm not betting anything.
Okay, but my logic, and this is going to be the sneaking thing in the back of my mind with the Lions, pretty much any game, is like, how much energy have they had to burn overcoming that slow start? Whereas if they had started the season hot, they would have been able to manage guys. And, it's a sequencing problem. And I think at some point within these final 4 rounds, there will be a day where that happens to the Lions.
I'm more thinking on the strategic front here because, as we had mentioned just before this, the Saints managed to keep things very open against Essendon and avoid stoppages, and they weren't anything super special at the source. It was more what was created on runs that fueled their success. So if Brisbane can bully them at the stoppage, that's how they'll blow this game open.
That's funny that the Saints would benefit from a low stoppage game, because you think of everything kind of relying on Rowan Marshall. You would think of this as a team that wants as many stoppages as possible so he can just start eating it out of the middle.
Up against Big O, though, that's a tough task.
Yeah, I think matchup-wise, body type-wise, I think this is one of the toughest for Marshall. I think he kind of meets his match in a lot of senses there. Totally different play styles outside of the actual hitouts. But just like physically, I think it's one of the more difficult one-on-ones for Marshall to size up to. And I think McInerney over these last few weeks has been playing some of his absolute best football.
All right, Matthias Philippou, I hope you're back, because that's another way that this game can get a lot more entertaining. Have been playing the 2 of the best games back-to-back of his career before he did his hip. And he's physical enough to complicate things for even a defense as seasoned and as restored, in a sense, as Brisbane ought to be.
Still no Jack Payne, but Harris Andrews, welcome back. Should be out of concussion protocol. The very logical and seemingly too obvious move would be Andrews in, Hipwood returns to forward, and Henry Smith comes out. Smith kind of got thrown in there a little early. It was kind of like, that banana that's still green, but you eat it just because you need to eat a banana.
He's not young. He was drafted in 2020.
No, but felt like he isn't ripe yet.
I can understand that. I think also you could see Bruce Reville coming back in for Connor McKenna.
Yeah, I was a little surprised to see Bruce dropped in the first place.
So add those up, you're going to get a much more complete Lions team, and they have a player to really honor in this game. Like, you want to talk club servants, Froggy is that.
Game number 200 for Ryan Lester. You put a bunch in the notes about him, so I'll let you take this.
200 games, you can see guys rack that up in 10 seasons, maybe 9 if it's a perennial contender. This is Ryan Lester's 15th year with the Brisbane Lions. He's only played 20 or more games once before, this season. He's had 5 contracts since the end of 2018, was delisted and re-rookied after the 2022 season. The club ended up backing him in enough, and he had one of the best years of his career. I thought the game was going to be past him and was very pleasantly surprised that it wasn't. He's had a lot to prove these past couple years with guys like Jack Payne and asserting themselves, Tom Duday being acquired, and, we'll be back for next year. We'll make his Lions debut next year, God willing.
This is a guy who could have easily taken the opportunity to go somewhere else in pursuit of more playing time and has stuck it out. And I'm not saying that he's obligated to do that at all. I don't blame any player that says, I'm not getting my chance here. I need to go somewhere that I can actually get regular playing time and be a major contributor. Nothing wrong with that, but it is a pretty cool story for Leicester to be able to get to this position. And to do this as a one club guy all the way through is pretty awesome.
With that, it's that time of night.
Well, lists are out.
Ooh, I can see something wrong with Geelong, because looks like Gary Rowan is accidentally enlisted in. So Geelong have 3 ins.
Well, here,
Chewy, Atkins, and Stanley.
Scroll through these and just kind of blurt out reactions.
Tui, Atkins, and Stanley in for Rowan, Duggan, and Closey. I feel like Closey could be compelled to go somewhere else if he keeps getting treated like this.
Okay, Duncan managed.
Stanley against O'Brien. That's going to be a very hit ball matchup.
You know what? I actually don't entirely hate this because this could allow Blitzovs to get the Phil Thorpe matchup.
Welcome back, Matt Crouch. Thought he was lost for the season with that AC joint injury. That's great. Josh Worrell back as well. And Dan Curtin's actually, well, he's part of the interchange, so he will probably be the sub again.
Bulldogs totally unchanged. Jack Billings omitted. That little honeymoon phase did not last long.
Surprised Bill Laurie's left out too. Thought he had one of his better games. Maybe they'll back in Howes a bit more on the wing. That definitely Tolstrup having healed up from his concussion, and Tom Sparrow has something to prove. Played well with Casey after his demotion, but if he can step up in the middle again, then that'll, I think, allay a lot of Melbourne fans' fears going forward. Yeah, the Eagles are the big axe swingers this week. Holy cow.
Well, no, not really, because it's 3 injuries, 2 suspensions, and 1 omission. So it wouldn't be the opposite of swinging the axe, but it's like perpendicular to the concept of swinging the axe. Does that make sense?
Changing the bed sheets?
Yeah, I guess. What would be the opposite, though? Like, where instead of swinging the, we need another term for just like backing the same guys in. Ooh, I got it. If it's a team that's been struggling, there's nothing wrong with going unchanged when you're rolling. Like, why mess with a good thing? I don't mind the Bulldogs doing that this week, even if it leaves a couple of pretty deserving players out.
Poor also unchanged.
Ooh, Griffin Logue out. That doesn't help North.
That means Coleman and Pink playing back.
And Core still in. Okay. But I figured out when a team is playing like shit and you want them to like make a bunch of changes, but they won't do it. They're doing instead of swinging the axe.
They are?
Letting the mayonnaise sit out in the sun.
Why would you say something so controversial yet so brave?
Jack Graham back. All right, he'll go to Sheasel.
All right. Rowbottom in, Francis in. So Melican and Campbell out. Yeah, Campbell omitted. I called that one. He did nothing.
So Fiorini and Sexton, the 2 obvious ins are, well, no Jed Walter still. It's a smaller look then for Gold Coast.
Not a fan of Harvey Harrison and Lockie Sullivan being omitted. But yes, Billy Frampton in instead of Oleg Markov. Good call.
Let Oleg spend time with his partner and his kid. And
Boyd in, but Kemp's still there.
Yeah, Jack Martin in for his 150th. Congrats to him.
Carroll omitted is a little interesting.
Not super surprised. More surprised, actually, about Lockie Cowan.
Let's see, Sunday. We just have extended benches. Ooh, Jake Riccardi, the finger injury.
Yeah, so would it be Grew to come back in?
That's my guess. Yeah, McGinnis omitted. You called that one.
My guess is that that's Frenchie. And then Deer, part of the extended bench. So yeah, I could see Gunstead for Deer. I think we're actually pretty close on a lot of these. And yes, McKenna out for the Lions. So you'd imagine that's a swap for Bruce. And Hunter Clark hurt. Really? Again?
As is tradition. All right. Darn, I was really hoping there would be something that I could just like blurt out that was like completely insane. Like, Lois talking about, singing along with that song about finding a dead janitor down by the river. And it turns out it's a John Mellencamp song.
Or was the David Sedaris book. You want the guys killed and buried a man?
Yes.
I do want to say it before we go here. Harvey Johnston, Clay Hall, and Tyrell Dewar all in, and neither of Andrew Gaff or Dom Sheed I like.
That's the benefit of not having the old coach.
Still got Witherden in their defense. Oh, Rotham's actually injured. That makes it easier. This should easily be a more competitive team for West Coast, and McGovern being in will, of course, provide a boost.
Main character picks. I am instituting a rule for this week. Nothing from the Carleton-Collingwood game, because it feels too obvious that the main character is going to come from there, just like we couldn't pick Jack Ginnivan a couple of weeks ago.
I was going to say the exact same thing, so thank you for that.
I'm going to go first with my main character pick this week. Since it's a special occasion for his club, and he's due for something entertaining, I'm going with Libba.
Libba over Treloar, over Bont, over all that.
Yeah, because main character doesn't have to be performance-based. It can be a meme thing. It can be just something funny. And he seems like such a good bet to do that.
I wish I could see from this list where David Roden is. Looks like no Razor this week, so I can't choose him. Maybe he's on one of the Sunday games then.
Who do we have at Geelong?
Rosebery is on the Friday game.
Okay.
Wait, which of these guys were on the crew for the 2016 Grand Final? Stevic was... Fuck it, Matt Stevic.
All right, then. There's a lot of places to follow us. You should do that. Do everything to follow us except for, like, standing 10 feet behind us constantly.
I mean, I would be impressed if you found exactly where we were, even though we tell you the cities we're in.
It would be kind of funny if you walk around and we just have someone standing a few feet behind us at all times. Never saying anything, never doing anything, just physically following us.
Yeah, not a bodyguard, just there.
If someone asks them what's going on, they just say, like, I was told to follow them.